Upgrades for the Zandvoort Grand Prix are here, and there are plenty of things to go over, a lot of pictures to discuss, and a lot of different things to different cars. Specifically speaking, the Aston Martin has a lot of changes. They're really trying to bring themselves back into this P2 position, or even really be fighting for that podium with the Red Bulls consistently. So let's see if these updates can bring it. Let's talk about all of it in this video. Let's start off with the rear wings, per usual. So here is the start of the rear wings. We have in here Red Bull, Ferrari, Mercedes, and Alpine. And if you actually look at this, the Red Bull is the most loaded, but as I talked about in a video before, and as I discussed, it will be the most loaded. Honestly, it's just the best wing when it comes to the amount of balance that it gives, but also the amount of DRS that it gives. So yes, it will be stronger now on the DRS. So if they don't get a pole position, they're probably still going to catch the car. This is probably going to be a Red Bull dominated track. Kind of like how Spain was, this track kind of performs in that same type of way, especially now with that last corner in Spain. Zandvoort and Spain are pretty similar in that aspect. Now Ferrari, pretty loaded, but not as loaded. Mercedes is the second most loaded, and Alpine doesn't even have that loaded of a wing, honestly. So I think they're going for straight line speed and overtaking potential here on this track. Now we go over the other four teams, and two teams here have a couple of revisions to their rear wing, and I'll talk about that more in detail later. McLaren, new rear wing for them. They actually brought it here. I thought it was coming to Monza, so good thing for McLaren bringing it here. Aston Martin also have a couple of revisions on this rear wing. It's still a rear wing that they used, actually, very similar to their Monaco type wing. And all of them have gurney flaps, with the exception of the Alfa Romeo wing, but that one is almost as less loaded as the Alpine. But the car has been pretty good on mechanical grip, it just hasn't had the aerodynamic efficiency. So they should be all right there. And Haas, the butter shredder, yep, their wing is practically the same as McLaren, so very similar in that aspect. Then we just have the last two wings, which is AlphaTauri and Williams. And the AlphaTauri wing is pretty light. This is their new updated wing. It's still loaded, but not that loaded. And Williams, per usual, has a very little loaded wing because that is just how the car works. So I don't really expect them to perform very well here in Zandvoort. It'll be a hard track for them to actually do extremely well. Now let's go into the actual updates. So Aston Martin, they have brought to this Grand Prix, they brought a couple of front wing specs. Now both these front wings have been used. The one on the upper top is a front wing that they've been using since Spain, and it has not been performing to a level I think they've wanted it to be. Now the one on the bottom is actually the wing that we kind of classify as like an FIA illegal banned wing because of its flexing and so on. But that is the wing that they originally had, and you can tell that they are a completely different style of wings in comparison to each other. Now, let's see if they use that one and compare it to how the airflow is going to be now on the car in comparison to the one that they now have. But in Canada, they performed very well with that wing, so with the wing on the top. So I want to see, let's see where their analysis goes and what wing they actually use going into the Grand Prix. It'll be interesting to see which type of analysis they get out of this in the 3 free practices that we have. Next up, this is what I want to talk about with the Aston Martin rear wing. It's the way that little L corner, the one you see that's red highlighted with the finger pointing to it, that is a little less than what it used to be. Before, it had a little bit more in there, so this should actually reduce their drag going onto the straights. Red Bull has it very similar to this. If you actually look at Red Bull's wing, it is super, super close to what this Aston Martin wing is now. They're trying to almost identically copy it. And even now, I just noticed this looking at this picture, if you look into the middle divot of that wing, Red Bull also has that little divot in its wing, but it's got a pretty big gurney flap onto it because it's an actual high downforce track. Now here's something interesting. Now McLaren brought a rear, it's the beam wing of the back of the car. That is very similar to that type that Red Bull uses. Now, the actual McLaren car is very similar to the Red Bull car in a lot of ways. In a lot of aspects. So another thing to add on to it, it also has a new rear wing, which should be the next picture, as it is. In this picture, you can actually see that also beam wing that I was talking about, how big it is for the high downforce, but also to promote more airflow to its DRS and actually give it a more stronger emphasis on its straight line speed in comparison to what that McLaren has been absolutely nowhere. But the actual rear wing is finally different. They've had the same rear wing for the whole entire season with the exception of now. And it is done in a little bit of a different fashion. As you can see here, it's more straight line than it used to be before. You could tell that the other wing had to promote a lot more drag onto it because the actual rear of the car was not that great. So now they actually brought the wing a little bit more out. The part that I was just talking about with the L shape towards the back of it is also very similar to the Aston Martin. They're pretty close in wings now. I mean, every wing is looking to look like the actual Red Bull wing because that one promotes the best DRS efficiency. the most straight line speed and really gets the best out of the cars. So I don't see why they would go in any other different direction. And then here is the actual race suit for Alfa Romeo. I wanted to mention this because I thought it actually looked pretty sick. So they have the different number onto it, the way that the lettering looks, the way it's kind of like going up the leg sleeves. I think it looks sick. I'm actually like, this would be really cool if this was their like overall like overalls for the whole entire season. It would look very cool. I'm a fan of this. But also look at Bottas's helmet. I mean, this is just chef's kiss. It looks beautiful for sure. I am a big fan of this. I think in general, Bottas has had actually really cool helmets this year in comparison to last year, which I did not like them at all. Not the slightest bit. Now here is another thing to note. More teams going the more Red Bull direction. Here is Ferrari. They brought this update a couple of Grand Prix ago. It's not something that's very recent, but this is a newer style to what they had before. So yes, this is very similar to what the Red Bull beam wing looks like for its triple DRS effect. Ferrari is very much going off of that. They're going off of that exact inspiration. They even changed a little bit of the diffuser before in some other Grand Prix, but it's just nice to know that they're trying to get that because they've had a lot of straight line speed. I feel like here on this track, they could be a actual big threat. If it rains, no, but if it's a dry track, I think Ferrari could actually be a big threat to Red Bull here. How big? We'll see. I mean, I think they can take Perez. Can they take Max? Probably not, but with the upgrades and direction they're going in, it's definitely something to be looked into because the car is fast in a straight line. They just have to get down their aerodynamic efficiency going through corners. They say they're very weak when the wind picks up, and Zandvoort can have some pretty windy aspects to it. I mean, just being in the Netherlands or Holland or whatever you might call the country, it's a very windy country, so it could promote bad stuff for Ferrari. At the same time, it could promote good stuff, so we'll see. Now, here are the biggest updates of the Grand Prix. This is definitely going into Aston Martin, and yet again, they are taking philosophy off of Red Bull. They had the shark fin. Red Bull takes the shark fin off in Hungary. What do? Practically the same thing. And now they've made their engine cover not dip down as little as it did before. Now it's way more up top, very, very similar to the RB19 in this aspect. It still has a more like the engine cover itself is still very straight lined from the actual halo, which Red Bull doesn't have it in that type of way. It does look very similar in the way that this actual like flap is on it. I mean, you see the shark fin, you see the one before it and what they have now. Very similar to the Red Bull in that aspect. Now here's another picture, and you can't really catch that much of a glimpse from this picture. It's pretty blurry, but it's a good picture to show you that they're actually putting stuff on its underfloor to actually test out how the floor is working because a new floor is here. Now, obviously, we're not going to get pictures on the underfloor. That would be great to go over, but we're not going to get that. Let's be real here. So, in reality, this is the best picture we're going to get, but I have a couple more that shows it off even more. Here's even more pictures showing you the updates they have brought. They've brought a lot to shred drag, but also try and get themselves back into the rear grip monster it was. So, as I talked about on its rear wing, the little winglet that they have, you can now see it even better in this picture. But you can also see what they've done to the rear brake ducts and how they're working into their diffuser from the outside. As you can see, a couple of more updates. Still going into the kind of way that Red Bull has it, but hey, go into that aspect. I don't see why other teams should not follow that Red Bull aspect. It's what makes the car amazing. No drag on that Red Bull car. So take inspiration off that. I see Aston Martin what they're doing. I think these are going to be big upgrades going into this Grand Prix. If it's rainy, we're probably not going to see these updates really as much into action and really see what they can pull out, but it's all about downforce at the end of the day. They had apparently too much downforce going into Canada, and that's kind of what caused their problems. So I think this is to shred more drag. Maybe they're not adding as much downforce, but shredding the drag, which is a big emphasis on the car. And they were actually pretty decent in Belgium, so the trend could continue, but Zandvoort is a completely different track, way more similar to Spain, and Spain was not a great Grand Prix for them. Here's another picture, and here you can see, here's where I wanted to point out a couple of these updates. First of all, the beam wing, very close to Mercedes's. They haven't really changed too much in that aspect. It still looks pretty effective, but it doesn't look to the same philosophy as the Red Bull, but that's okay. You can also see how that engine cover now looks from the back view of it, but how much less profound it is going from the side pod to the actual engine cover. Before, there's a big curve going into the actual side pod and trying to really emphasize the flow going into its floor, but now it's way less of that and a little bit closer actually to how the Red Bull has it. But also, the diffuser, if you actually look at it, the little Williams trick that Red Bull actually got into its little corner spots, they added it to their diffuser. Look at it closely, it looks a lot more similar to that Red Bull diffuser. So yes, Red Bull, Red Bull, Red Bull. I know I mentioned it a lot, but that is where teams are going to get the most emphasis and performance out of their car if they do it in the right way. And lastly, I kind of wanted to bring this up. I'm not sure, but I do think that this actual part on the Alpine is a bit differently done. It's a little engine cooling spot. I think this is an upgrade to the car, actually showing off how the cooling ducts look on the car. It used to not be like this. It was more towards the back, so it is a new spot for them, and I think it's an upgrade. It kind of looks like they've done a couple different things. Just wanted to point that out. And that's all for the video. I'm excited for the Dutch Grand Prix. It should bring a lot of fun for our actual eyes. I really hope it's gonna be fun, and I hope that this actual rain brings out a lot closer of a grid. Hope you guys enjoyed. Please leave a like, subscribe. That would mean the world for me, and peace.